The positive/negative realms of higher densities. In the higher densities, the name of the game is consciousness. This simply means that the higher densities of existence, whether positive or negative in orientation, all recognize that the business of all being and existence everywhere is always that of consciousness. Becoming more and more aware. Awareness is related to density of consciousness, so to say. The STS, service to self, way of achieving density of consciousness is to gain weight by assimilation of other consciousness units. This is generally promoted as all is one and refers to evil as a rebellion or a fault or something that will ultimately be done away with. STO, service to others, on the other hand sees gaining weight in a different way. It sees that an acknowledgement of the consciousness of other self as equal to its own consciousness, in spite of completely different manifestation of that being, is the way to network the consciousness so that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The difference is that the STO guys recognize consciousness as being an integrative activity of mutual networking and interdependence because they view all others as self, even if they are different, and therefore seek to help and assist because the other is self in an absolute internal sense. In this way, absolute consciousness, or God is glorified by a marvelous diversity of being if you wish to put it in those terms. The negative guys, on the other hand, play the game in terms of domination, subjugation and absorption of other consciousnesses into one. But, they too, understand that the rules of the game posit that in order for them to truly absorb into their being these other consciousnesses, that the other must choose to become part of their self-aggrandizement. An unwilling food is, in essence, not nutritious so to say. If the consciousness does not choose, it becomes a poison to the consciousness that seeks to eat it. And so they must promote oneness in a very particular way. Note that both sides acknowledge oneness, but in very different ways, so, we have to understand here that the true negative realm agenda is to eat consciousness. So, this actually prevents an overt takeover in literal, physical terms. If an invasion was detected, this would mean that the veil would be lifted and all would see the man behind the curtain and would be disgusted and turn away. Just as in The Wizard of Oz, those ruby slippers have to be obtained very carefully. Gathering the essence is an art of great subtlety. The negative alien plan is, in its purest sense, stalking. The aim of stalking is to create a completely controlled artificial environment composed of thoroughly predictable human behaviors, made predictable because they have been programmed to respond to cues of conditioning, inculcated through centuries of lies and obfuscations presented in the form of religions, and all of this revolves around a story that is actually untrue, and wholly misrepresentative of the real negative aim. For centuries these programming signals have been being set up either because of time travel capabilities, or because of actual historical presence. Various prophets or religious leaders have been influenced to preach, or teach or prophesy philosophies designed to lay a foundation for later takeover, possibly in our present time. When people begin to get wise, the negatives simply go back into the past, add something more to the soup to cover up the new awareness. This then acts as a domino effect and influences our present. Time loops and all that. A lot of people think that the alien invasion scenario is a ruse concocted by the government to create the impression that there is a forming threat, thereby enabling the institution of a hierarchy. But, this idea is based on a misrepresentation of the process just described. The important thing to remember is this: there is not a unified conspiratorial activity going on here in the hierarchy of government. The divide and conquer effect is also manifest at this level and suits the alien purposes to a T. Such activity at all levels is consistent with their program of stalking, in which confusion and cross-purpose prevents a clear perception on the part of the stalkies. Yet, at some deep level there may be a direct conspiratorial interaction between the secret government and the negative aliens. But it is unlikely that any name of those involved would be recognized by anyone, no matter how in the know regarding the subject. These secret superiors are just that, secret. Any organization you can name, or about which you are aware, are merely outer circles. What is the designed objective of this stalking? It is twofold. First, the effect of stalking is sort of like stampeding a herd of cattle. Bit by bit, they are consolidated into a negative mode which consists of the idea of us versus them. Even though, on the surface, it may seem that this mode is positive or STO. I.e. save the world because it is wrong or flawed, or blighted with original sin or whatever, the very fact that it is formed in the dominator mode of perceiving salvation outside, means that it can more easily be taken over body, mind and soul at a level that is unseen and unseeable. In other words, Satan can and most often does appear as an angel of light. It is only at the lower levels of the power structure that many still believe they are playing out the basic antagonism and self-protection roles. They believe that sending love and light to those in need is appropriate, without realizing that this activity is predicated upon a deep belief that there is something wrong, in error, in rebellion, and thus becomes again, us versus them. There is evidence that extensive implant technology may be used to ensure influenced obedience, yet, a degree of freedom must be conserved through the consciousness due to the essential fact that the valued commodity is consciousness. A totally drugged, surgically altered and thoroughly programmed psyche is only good for robotic slave service, and this may also be going on also. By the way, it is in this understanding that we find our way out of the trap. It isn't easy, but it is a way. The primary object of negative stalking is to persuade through strongly influenced, but not robotic, behavior patterns, the free choice of the targeted consciousness to align with negative higher density existence. Because, in the long run, the object is the eating of functioning units of consciousness by the negative hierarchy, with free will intact. It is not good food otherwise, and this is where physics comes in again. Because the conserved element of true consciousness is the irreducible value of free will. The mind of the subject must retain free will, which distinguishes consciousness as such. The instant the negative polarization is chosen as a result of true prerogative of free will, the subject immediately becomes functionally a part of the higher dimensional entity responsible for having induced the choice in the first place, regardless of the deceptive means employed, or the persuasive misrepresentations used in conditioning the terms through which the fateful choice is made. In other words, confusion, physical and or emotional/mental pain, exhaustion, blackmail, and even forms of torture are legitimate modes of persuasion. Of course, the more subtle the means used, the more value is retained. A tortured consciousness is the equivalent to being overcooked. Many higher-level beings of darkness are veritable connoisseurs. They particularly relish the subversion of those who are truly pure and strong-willed. There's an immediate psychic bond in this relationship to the higher density negative being who is the handler of the human agent who is now a functional part of his eater/master, and the negative hierarchy is proportionately enhanced with every induction/absorption of additional members. In other words, the negative hierarchy is a pyramidal food chain. The apex of the pyramid is comprised of the most persistent of the negative graduates, the one who has stuck it out against every evidence of diminishment, and is the ultimate example of wishful thinking. This ultimate wishful thinking means that they/it cannot see that they do not become God by assimilation and control of other selves, but that the real result is a gradual compaction and implosion and dissolution into primal matter and non-being, and here is where physics comes in again to help us get a handle on this conflict. Without duality, there would be no existence to discuss. From the one there is bilateral emergence. Exactly one half joyfully seeks life and creation and play and exploration. A sort of love of adventure. The other half expresses a fundamental fear of losing self in this play and exploration. This causes it to recoil upon itself, and this establishes the tension of polarization, which is the stuff of which the cosmos is constructed. This can be more easily understood as love of God through others, i.e. by loving others unconditionally, as God, since all are one, even though differentiated, as opposed to love of God through self, i.e. believing that love of himself is love of God, therefore others must love him too. The one view sees all others as self, and loves all and seeks to serve others. The other sees only self and seeks to appropriate all others to self to restore equilibrium. To go back to the cosmic sleep of oneness, so to speak, one analogy would be the difference between a free and adventurous child that is full of the sense of adventure as opposed to a child that wishes to own the mother and cling to her and incorporate her to himself, i.e. jealousy. The darkness is, in fact, a state of consciousness that has existed from the very beginning of individuation and which covets attention for itself alone. This consciousness hates, fears and deeply distrusts creation, and just wants to effectively roll over and go back to sleep in eternal union with the mother/father. An important point here is, this negative consciousness arises from the self-viewing self at the instant of creation and is, therefore, an integral part of creation. It cannot be separated from it because it exists only because of positive creative inception. Neither can exist without the other. It's that simple. Negative consciousness is the selfness of creation, the gravity that draws all that exists back to itself. It is the aspect of the one involved in contemplation and rejection of creativity in its own heart, frozen in that moment of vertigo experienced at the outrush of creative energy, and, because this state of consciousness occurs in conjunction with, and precisely because of, creative potential, or otherness, and is, in fact, identified through that factor, it cannot be done away with without all returning to the one and just going back to sleep. Thus we see that the efforts to save the world via punishment of the wicked, or conversion to the light or spiritualizing matter with love, are all expressions of the fundamental desire to undo creation, to kill God. Through the idea that evil/darkness is a rebellion, a fault, a thing to be done away with, the twist is introduced that lays the groundwork for domination and absorption. This is why, even though promulgated Christian principles seem to be good and uplifting, and, in fact, can be, the fundamental raison is flawed and also expresses itself in Christian history in such ways as the many slaughters that have been instituted in the name of Christianity. So, the bottom line is, this other half of the all, born along with the creative upsurge, becomes focused on actualizing its own impulse to undo creation, for it realizes that only then can it be at peace. The only way it can achieve that ideal narcissistic withdrawal into itself in infinite self-contemplation is through reclaiming all attention and consciousness that is, in effect, borrowed against the inconceivable magnitude of consciousness in cosmic sleep. Darkness becomes, in effect, an incurable insomniac. The consciousness of STS/darkness feels that it must tear apart the creative fabric of existence, thereby liberating those units of energy involved in the creative functions, and swallow them back into itself, erasing their differential properties and powers so as to restore the one as one, itself. However, this is not clearly seen at the lower densities until the masks are stripped away. The deepest implications of this are hidden by many veils. And even the fourth and fifth density participants do not necessarily comprehend this ultimate dissolution. Sort of the ultimate light eater preaching the gospel of devolution as salvation.